14 Hells Angels walked into a quiet diner and surrounded the waitress. Everyone froze, thinking she was in danger. But when their leader Martin looked the sheriff dead in the eye and said, "We're here for a girl," the room went silent because the video he slid across the counter showed a kidnapped 16-year-old tied to a chair with a sheriff's badge hanging on the wall behind her. Before we dive into this story of brotherhood, justice, and a promise that shook an entire town, where are you watching this from right now? Drop your city in the comments below. I want to see how far this story of loyalty and the Roadkeeper creed reaches across the world. And if you believe that some promises are worth breaking the law to keep, and that real family isn't blood but the people who ride beside you when the road gets dark, hit that subscribe button. You're about to join a brotherhood that stands for something bigger than badges and courtrooms. The road always warned before it arrived. Some mornings in Carson Ridge, Nevada, felt like they'd been pulled straight from a postcard that nobody wanted to send. Dusty, faded, stuck somewhere between a forgotten dream and the edge of nothing. Benny's Diner sat on Route 50 like a relic from the 1,950 seconds that refused to die. Red vinyl booths cracked from age, a jukebox humming Patsy Cline through speakers that crackled more than they sang, and neon lights that flickered with the rhythm of a tired heartbeat. It was the kind of place where coffee was always hot, the pie was always stale, and the people who came through rarely stayed long enough to matter. Mara liked it that way. She moved through the morning shift with practiced ease pot in one hand, order pad in the other, smile small but genuine. 6 months in Carson Ridge, 2 jobs, one heart still piecing itself back together from a man who'd promised forever and delivered nothing. The diner was almost empty that morning. A trucker sat at the counter nursing his 3rd cup of black coffee. Old Man Henry, the owner, a man with more stories than teeth, stood behind the grill flipping eggs with the efficiency of someone who'd done it 10,000 times. The radio mumbled something about weather and road closures, static hissing between words. Outside, the desert stretched endlessly under a sky so blue it hurt to look at. The sheriff's cruiser sat in the parking lot, engine idling. Sheriff Blake inside, scrolling through his phone, with the bored expression of a man who ruled a kingdom too small to matter. Everything was normal. And then it wasn't. The sound came first low, distant, building like thunder on the horizon, not the kind you hear, the kind you feel. It started in the chest, traveled down to the bones, and made the coffee in Mara's pot tremble. The trucker looked up. Old Man Henry froze mid-flip. Even the jukebox seemed to hold its breath. Mara turned toward the window. 14 motorcycles appeared on the horizon, chrome flashing under the morning sun like wildfire racing across the desert. They rode in perfect formation, 2 columns, 7 deep engines roaring in unison, creating a sound that was less mechanical and more primal, the kind of sound that made dogs run and hearts stop. They pulled into the gravel parking lot with military precision, each bike slotting into place like pieces of a puzzle that had been practiced 1,000 times. Dust kicked up in golden clouds. The engines cut simultaneously, and for one perfect, terrible moment, the world went completely silent. 14 men dismounted, leather vests, faded denim, boots that had walked more miles than most people ever drove. Patches stitched with care, skulls, flames, words in languages Mara didn't understand, but felt in her gut. At the front stood a man who looked like he'd been carved from the road itself. Martin Stone Maddox. Tall, 6'3" at least, with shoulders broad enough to block out the sun. His face was all sharp angles and weathered lines, the kind of face that had seen too much and decided to keep going anyway. Storm grey eyes that didn't blink, didn't waver, didn't ask for permission. Behind him, the crew fanned out Sophie-Anne, all scars and mischief. Troy, silent as a grave. Chris, young but hard-eyed like he'd been born older than he looked. And 10 others whose names Mara didn't know, but whose presence filled the space like smoke. Inside the diner, Forks froze mid-air. Conversations died. The trucker's hand moved slowly toward the door. Old Man Henry wiped his hands on his apron, muttering under his breath, "Lord, have mercy." Not again. Mara's hands trembled as she set the coffee pot down on the counter. It rattled against the formica, the sound impossibly loud in the silence. The diner door swung open. Martin walked in first, boots thudding against tile in a rhythm that felt wholly like a ritual older than laws, older than towns, older than the desert itself. The others followed, filling every booth, every corner, every breath of air. They didn't speak. Didn't need to. Mara stood frozen behind the counter, heart hammering, mind racing through every story she'd ever heard about men like these. Outlaws, angels, devils on wheels, but something in Martin's eyes made her pause. There was power there, yes, authority that came not from a badge but from miles traveled and promises kept. But beneath it, something else flickered. Loss. Purpose, the kind of burden that only men who'd carried the dead could recognize. Old Man Henry stepped forward, voice steady despite the tremor in his hands. "Take your break, girl." Before Mara could move, Martin spoke. His voice was low, calm, rolling like thunder that had decided to reason before it struck. Stay. It wasn't a request. It wasn't a threat. It was something in between, a statement of fact delivered with the certainty of someone who knew how the world worked and wasn't interested in debating it. Martin sat at the counter. The others followed suit, filling the diner like an army around a campfire, silent and watchful. Then the second door opened. Sheriff Blake stepped inside, hand resting casually on his holster, badge catching the morning light. His eyes swept the room, taking in the leather, the patches, the silent wall of men who looked at him like he was already irrelevant. "Martin Maddox," Blake said, voice tight with authority he didn't quite possess. "You and your boys can't just roll into my town." Martin didn't look up from the menu he wasn't reading. "We're not here for your town." Blake's jaw tightened. He stepped closer, boots squeaking on tile. "Then, what the hell are you here for?" The diner went so quiet Mara could hear her own heartbeat. Martin raised his eyes slowly, meeting Blake's gaze with the kind of calm that came from knowing exactly what he was capable of and having nothing left to prove. "A girl," Martin said. The air snapped tight. Blake's hand twitched toward his gun. Troy's hand moved to his belt. Sophiane's grin widened like a wolf spotting prey. But Martin didn't move, just held Blake's stare with those storm-grey eyes that had seen war, loss, and men who pretended to be stronger than they were. Old Man Henry set down his spatula. The trucker slipped out the door without paying, and Mara stood behind the counter, coffee pot still trembling in her hand, watching two kinds of law collide in a diner that smelled like burnt toast and motor oil. Outside, the desert wind picked up, carrying dust and secrets across Route 50. Inside, 14 men waited. And somewhere in Carson Ridge, a 16-year-old girl named Ellie prayed someone would come looking. Her name was Ellie Carter, and 3 nights ago, she disappeared. Mara knew her not well, but enough. Ellie had started working at Benny's 2 months back, part-time after school. 16 years old with quiet eyes that held too much weight for someone who should have been worried about prom dresses and college applications. She'd been kind, patient, the type of girl who said please and thank you even when customers didn't deserve it. The type who flinched when men stood too close. Martin's voice cut through Mara's thoughts, steady and deliberate. "Her name is Ellie Carter, 16, works here part-time, last seen 3 nights ago after closing." Blake crossed his arms, trying to project authority he was quickly losing. "Missing persons case is open. We're handling it." "You're handling it," Martin repeated, the words dripping with something cold. "That why nobody's seen a search party? That why her face isn't on every bulletin in town?" Blake's jaw tightened. "We have procedures." "Procedures?" Sophiane laughed from the corner booth, sharp and mocking. "That what you call it?" Blake's hand moved back toward his holster. "You watch your mouth." Troy stood slowly from his seat, 6'4" of silent menace. He didn't reach for a weapon, didn't need to, just stood there, and the temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Martin raised one hand, calm, controlled. Troy sat back down. Ellie's brother was one of ours, Martin said, eyes locked on Blake. Jesse Carter, Marine Corps, then patched into our chapter 5 years ago. Died in Afghanistan protecting a convoy. Mara's breath caught. She remembered Ellie mentioning a brother once, briefly, painfully, like speaking his name, cost something. Before he left, Martin continued, Jesse asked me to look after his sister if anything happened to him. We made a promise. We don't break promises. Old man Henry stepped out from behind the grill, grease-stained apron, weathered hands, eyes sharp. I fought in a war too, Sheriff. I know what a promise to a dying man means. Blake shifted uncomfortably. Look, I understand your sentiment, but this is police business. Then do your business, Martin said. Where is she? We're investigating Liar. The word landed like a slap. Blake's face flushed red. You've got no right. Sofian pulled out his phone and slid it across the counter. The screen glowed. A video played. Ellie, tied to a chair in a dark room, face bruised, crying, begging, and behind her, barely visible in the dim light, a sheriff's badge hanging on the wall. The diner went absolutely silent. Mara's coffee pot slipped from her hand and shattered on the floor, ceramic shards scattering like broken teeth. Blake's face went pale. That's fabricated. You edited. We didn't edit anything, Martin said quietly. We got this video 2 hours ago. Anonymous source. Same source told us you've been giving Ellie rides home after her shifts. Old man Henry stepped closer to Blake, voice shaking with rage. You sick son of a bitch! I fought men like you overseas. Blake's hand was on his gun now, but 12 sets of eyes tracked the movement. 12 hands moved to belts, pockets, vests. One wrong move and the diner would become a graveyard. Martin stood slowly, towering over Blake. You've got one chance, Sheriff. Tell me where she is. Blake's mouth opened. Closed, opened again. I don't know what you're talking about. The lie was obvious. Pathetic. Martin turned to Mara. You worked with her. Think. Mara's mind raced, heart pounding. Then she remembered weeks ago, Ellie talking about her brother, about an old cabin near Miller's Creek where they used to fish when she was little. Miller's Creek, Mara whispered. There's a cabin. She mentioned it once. Martin's eyes softened just slightly. Thank you. He turned to his crew. One word. Ride. 14 men stood in perfect unison. Leather creaked. Boots hit tile in rhythm. As they moved toward the door, Martin paused, looking back at Blake. If she's hurt worse than that video showed, Sheriff, the law won't find you fast enough. The door swung shut behind them. Engines roared to life, and Sheriff Blake stood alone in the middle of Benny's diner, hand still on his gun, knowing he'd just been judged by a jury that didn't need a courtroom. The engines formed a symphony of controlled fury as 14 bikes tore through Carson Ridge, heading east toward Miller's Creek. Mara watched from the diner window until the dust settled and the sound faded into the desert. Her hands were still shaking. Blake stood frozen, face pale, hand finally dropping from his holster. He looked at old man Henry, then at Mara, searching for something sympathy, maybe, or fear. He found neither. You know what you just did, Blake said, voice tight. You aided and abetted. I could arrest you both for obstruction. Henry laughed, bitter, sharp. Go ahead, boy. Arrest a 72-year-old vet and a waitress for telling the truth. See how that plays when those boys come back. Blake's radio crackled. Unit 7, do you copy? We've got reports of a motorcycle gang heading toward Miller's Creek. He grabbed the radio. Copy. I'm handling it. Need backup? Blake looked at the empty diner at the shattered coffee pot, at the phone still lying on the counter, showing Ellie's terrified face. "Negative," he said quietly. "Stand by." He turned and walked out, shoulders hunched, moving like a man who just realized he was standing on the wrong side of justice. 15 miles east, the Angels slowed their bikes near a rundown gas station, the kind with one pump that barely worked and a clerk who'd seen everything and remembered nothing. Martin pulled up to the door. An old man sat on a stool, smoking a cigarette that was more ash than tobacco. "You seen a black SUV come through here?" Martin asked. The old man studied him, eyes sharp beneath bushy eyebrows. Then he noticed the patch on Martin's vest. His expression changed. "You're Jesse's people," he said. Martin nodded once. "SUV came through 2 nights ago, headed toward the creek, didn't stop, had county plates. Sheriff's vehicle?" The old man took a long drag. "Might have been." Martin handed him a 50. "You didn't see us?" "Never do," the old man replied. The bikes rolled out, slower now, tactical. The sun was beginning to dip toward the horizon, painting the desert in shades of amber and blood. Sofiane pulled up beside Martin. "What's the play when we get there?" "We get her out," Martin said. "Clean, quiet, no bodies unless we have to." Troy, riding on the other side, made a hand signal, 2 fingers, then a fist. Understood, controlled. They rode in silence for another 10 minutes until the trees thickened and the creek appeared a thin ribbon of water cutting through red rock and sage. And there, half hidden by cottonwoods, sat a cabin. Lights flickered inside. Martin raised his fist. All 14 bikes stopped simultaneously. He dismounted, moved to the front of the group, eyes scanning the cabin. 1 entrance, 2 windows. A deputy's cruiser parked behind it, half covered by a tarp. Sofiane crouched beside him. 2 guards, maybe 3. Blake's probably inside. "Could be a trap," Chris whispered. Martin shook his head. "He doesn't think we're smart enough to find him. That's his first mistake." He turned to his crew, voice low but carrying. "Troy, Sofiane, take the back. Chris, Jax, cover the sides. Rest of you, stay on the bikes. Engines ready. We go in quiet, we come out fast." They nodded. No words needed. Just the brotherhood, moving like a single organism, precise, deadly, purposeful. Martin checked his watch. Waited for the sun to dip just a little lower, casting longer shadows. Then he moved. Silent as smoke, fast as vengeance, the Angels closed in on the cabin where a 16-year-old girl had been praying someone would remember her brother's promise. The desert had a way of swallowing sound, wind through sage, the distant cry of a hawk, the crunch of boots on gravel. But inside the cabin, Ellie Carter heard none of it. She heard only her own breathing, ragged and shallow, and the low murmur of voices in the next room. Blake's voice, cold, calculating. "We move her tonight. Too much heat in town." Another voice, Deputy Mills, younger, nervous. "What about the bikers? People saw them roll in." "They're bluffing. They've got no proof." They had a video. Edited. "Fake. We stick to the story. She ran away. Happens all the time with girls like her." Ellie closed her eyes, tears sliding down bruised cheeks. Girls like her. As if being poor, being alone, being 16 made her disposable. She thought of Jesse, her brother. The only person who'd ever made her feel safe. He used to say, "If anything happens to me, the brothers will come. They'll find you. I promise." She'd thought it was just talk, the kind of thing soldiers said to make little sisters feel better. But then she heard it. A sound so faint she almost missed it, the creak of a floorboard outside the back door. Martin moved like a shadow, testing the door handle. Locked. He glanced at Troy, who produced a slim piece of metal from his vest and went to work. 5 seconds. The lock clicked. They entered the cabin through the kitchen, old, grimy, smelling of mildew and fear. Sophiane moved past them, checking corners, hand signals sharp and clear. In the main room, Blake sat at a table with Deputy Mills, both of them staring at a map, deciding where to bury their mistake. Martin stepped into the doorway. "Evening, Sheriff." Blake's head snapped up, hand going for his gun, but Troy was faster, his own weapon leveled before Blake's fingers touched metal. "Don't," Troy said quietly. Mills stood, panic flashing across his face. "You're trespassing. This is—" Sophiane grabbed him by the collar and slammed him against the wall. "Shut up." Martin walked forward slowly, boots thudding like a countdown. He stopped 3 feet from Blake, towering over the man who'd sworn to protect and serve. "Where is she?" Blake's jaw worked, eyes darting toward the locked door on the far side of the room. Martin didn't wait for an answer. He crossed the room in 2 strides and kicked the door open. Ellie sat tied to a chair, wrists raw, face pale, eyes wide with terror that shifted instantly to shock. You came," she whispered. Martin knelt in front of her, pulling a knife from his belt and cutting the ropes with swift, careful motions. "Your brother asked me to look after you. We don't break promises." Ellie collapsed into his arms, sobbing. Behind them, Blake made a move, reaching for something under the table. Troy's gun fired once, not at Blake, at the table. The bullet splintered wood inches from his hand. "Next one's in your knee," Troy said flatly. Blake froze. Martin stood, lifting Ellie gently. "Can you walk?" She nodded, legs shaky but determined. Martin turned to Blake. His voice was calm, cold, final. "The road decides your fate now. If I were you, I'd start running." He carried Ellie toward the door. Sophiane lingered, grinning at Blake. "Shame about your house, Sheriff. Heard it's gonna burn real pretty tonight." Blake's face went white. The angels filed out, engines roaring to life like a chorus of judgment. And as they rode away into the fading light, Ellie looked back once at the cabin, at the place where she'd thought she'd die. Then she looked at Martin, at the patch on his vest, at the men who'd ridden through hell to keep a dead man's promise. And for the first time in 3 days, she felt safe. By the time the angels reached the safe house, a modest ranch owned by an old army nurse named Gloria, the sun had set completely, leaving the desert bathed in silver moonlight. Ellie was cleaned up, given food, wrapped in a blanket that smelled like lavender and safety. Gloria asked no questions. She'd been a friend of Jesse's, and in the world the angels inhabited, that was all the explanation anyone needed. Martin stood on the porch, cigarette glowing faintly in the dark, watching the horizon. Sophiane joined him, leaning against the railing. "You think Blake runs?" "No," Martin said. "Men like him think they're untouchable, right up until they're not. And if he comes after us—" Martin flicked ash into the wind. "Then we remind him why we don't." Inside, Ellie sat on the couch, staring at the patch Martin had given her, Jesse's patch, the one he'd worn until the day he shipped out. She traced the stitching with trembling fingers. "He talked about you," she said quietly. "All of you. Said you were his real family." "He was ours," Martin replied. Troy appeared in the doorway. "News is spreading. Blake's house just went up." Martin didn't react. Just took another drag. "Anybody hurt?" "Empty when it happened. Clean burn." Sophiane grinned. "Damn shame. Electrical fire, probably." Martin's lip twitched, not quite a smile, but close. Back in Carson Ridge, the glow of flames lit up the night sky. Sheriff Blake stood in his driveway, watching his house collapse into itself, sirens wailing in the distance, neighbors gathered, whispering, pointing. Nobody offered sympathy. The fire chief approached. "Blake, you got enemies?" Blake said nothing, just stared at the inferno consuming everything he'd built on lies and corruption. By morning, the story had spread through Carson Ridge like wildfire itself, the missing girl found, the sheriff exposed, the angels vanishing into the desert like legends that only appeared when justice demanded it. And in Benny's diner, Mara stood behind the counter, staring at the shattered remains of the coffee pot she'd dropped. Old Man Henry swept up the pieces. "You did good, girl. I was terrified," she admitted. "That's when courage counts," he said. The door chimed. Mara looked up, half expecting leather and thunder. But it was just the mailman, dropping off bills and circulars. Still, she couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed, that she'd witnessed something rare: men who lived by a code most people had forgotten. Men who kept promises, even when the world didn't. Outside, the desert wind carried the faint echo of engines, distant but ever-present, and Mara wondered if she'd ever see them again. The sun rose over Carson Ridge the way it always did, indifferent, inevitable, casting long shadows over a town that had just learned what real justice looked like. Mara opened Benny's diner alone, 2 hours before her shift officially started. Sleep had been impossible. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Ellie's face in that video, heard Martin's voice, calm, controlled, carrying the weight of a promise kept. The diner smelled like burnt coffee and memory. She started the grill, flipped the neon sign to "Open", and stood behind the counter, waiting for the world to come back to normal. It didn't. By 8 a.m., the place was packed, not with the usual truckers and early risers, but with people who wanted to talk, to speculate, to make sense of what had happened. Old Man Henry arrived, moving slower than usual, eyes carrying something between pride and weariness. He tied on his apron without a word and started cracking eggs. The conversations swirled around them. Heard the angels found her. Heard Blake's gone, just disappeared. Good riddance, man was dirty as they come. Those bikers broke the law too, you know. Maybe, but they broke it for the right reasons. Mara poured coffee, nodded politely, said nothing. But inside, she felt something shifting, a line in the sand that separated people who understood justice from people who only understood rules. Around noon, a black SUV pulled into the lot. Federal plates. 2 men in suits stepped out, badges gleaming. FBI. Mara's stomach dropped. They entered, scanned the room, and walked directly to the counter. "We're looking for anyone who witnessed the incident involving the motorcycle club yesterday." Old Man Henry didn't look up from the grill. "Don't know what you're talking about." The taller agent frowned. "Sheriff Blake's house burned down last night. A minor was recovered from an illegal detention. 14 bikers were reported in the area." "You're telling me you didn't see anything?" "That's exactly what I'm telling you," Henry said. The agent turned to Mara. "Miss?" She met his eyes, hands steady on the coffee pot. "I saw a girl get rescued. I saw men keep a promise. That's all." The agent's jaw tightened. "Vigilante justice is still illegal. So is kidnapping," Mara replied quietly. The 2 men exchanged glances. The shorter one leaned in. "If we find out you're withholding information, then you'll do what?" Old Man Henry stepped out from behind the grill, spatula still in hand. "Arrest a waitress for not snitching on the men who saved a girl's life? Go ahead. See how that plays on the evening news." The agent stared him down. He didn't blink. Finally, they left, SUV kicking up dust as it pulled back onto Route 50. Mara exhaled shakily. "They'll be back." "Let 'em," Henry said. "Some laws are worth breaking." That evening, as Mara locked up the diner, she found something tucked under the doormat, a folded piece of black leather. She picked it up carefully, hands trembling. It was a patch worn, stitched with red thread, smelling faintly of engine oil and desert wind. The words read, "Roadkeeper Honor Forever Ride." Pinned to it was a note, written in sharp, deliberate handwriting. "For courage when it mattered. You stood your ground. The road remembers. M." Mara pressed the patch to her chest, tears sliding down her cheeks. She didn't know if she'd ever see them again. Didn't know if Martin and his brothers were still out there, riding toward the next promise, the next fight. But she knew one thing for certain. She wasn't the same woman who'd served coffee that morning. She was someone who'd seen angels wear leather, who'd learned that justice didn't always come from courtrooms, and that sometimes the road delivered what the law forgot. 70 miles east of Carson Ridge, where the desert stretched endless and the highway became a thread connecting nowhere to nothing, the angels stopped. No buildings, no towns, just red rock, sage, and a sky so vast it made men feel small and infinite all at once. They built a fire, 14 men in a circle, leather vests illuminated by flickering flames, bottles of whiskey passing hand to hand in a ritual older than any law written on paper. Martin sat on a fallen log, staring into the fire like it held answers he'd been searching for his whole life. Sophie-Anne broke the silence first. "You think Blake's gone for good?" "He's gone," Martin said. "Men like him can't hide from their own shadows." Troy took a swig from the bottle and passed it. "What about the feds? They'll sniff around. They always do. But they've got nothing. No witnesses, no evidence, just stories." Chris Young, still learning the weight of the patch, spoke up. "Why do we do this? Risk everything for people who'll never know our names." The fire crackled. Wind whispered through the sage. Martin looked at him, eyes steady. "You know why. Tell me anyway." Martin stood, walked closer to the fire, and pulled something from his vest, a dog tag. Worn, faded. Jesse Carter's name etched into the metal. "Jesse gave me this the night before he deployed," Martin said. "He knew what he was riding into, knew he might not come back. And he looked me in the eye and said, 'If anything happens to me, look after my sister. Don't let her be alone. Don't let her be forgotten.'" He held the tag up, firelight catching the edges. I said yes. We all said yes, because that's what brothers do. We carry each other's burdens. We keep promises when the world stops caring. He looked around the circle, meeting each man's eyes. "We're not heroes. We're not saints. We're just men who decided that loyalty means something, that justice isn't just a word judges use. That family isn't just blood. It's the people who ride beside you when the road gets dark." Sophie-Anne raised his bottle. "To Jesse." "To Jesse," the others echoed. They drank in silence, the fire burning low, the stars overhead, infinite and indifferent. Then Troy spoke, voice rough with emotion. "We should make it official." "Make what official?" Martin asked. "The code. The thing we all live by but never say out loud." Martin considered this, nodded slowly. "All right. What do we call it?" "The Roadkeeper Creed," Chris said. The name settled over them like a benediction. Martin stood, facing his brothers. "Then let's say it. All of us. So it's real." They rose, forming a tighter circle, firelight dancing across weathered faces and scarred hands. Martin's voice rang out, steady and sure. "No law above loyalty." The others repeated it. "No man above mercy." Again, the echo. "No soul left behind." The words hung in the air, sacred and binding. Sophie-Anne added one more line, grinning through the solemnity. "And the road always remembers." They stood in silence, the creed spoken, the bond sealed. Not with ink, not with papers, with fire and whiskey and promises made under a desert sky. And somewhere, 70 miles west, Mara lay awake in her small apartment, holding a leather patch, wondering if the men who'd given it to her knew they'd changed her life. They did, because the road remembered, and the angels never forgot. 3 weeks later, Carson Ridge settled into an uneasy peace. Sheriff Blake was gone, vanished like smoke, leaving behind a burned house and a trail of questions nobody wanted to answer. The county appointed an interim sheriff, a quiet man from 2 towns over, who kept his head down and his badge clean. Ellie Carter recovered slowly, staying with Gloria until the trauma faded enough for her to breathe without fear. She enrolled in online classes, started seeing a counselor, and began the long work of healing. She never spoke publicly about what happened, didn't need to. The town knew, and in the way small towns do, they chose sides, some grateful for the angel's intervention, others whispering about vigilantes and lawlessness. Mara didn't care what they whispered. She kept working at Benny's, kept pouring coffee, kept smiling at truckers who never knew how close they'd come to witnessing something that would have made headlines. But everything had changed. She started keeping a journal, voice memos, really, recorded on her phone late at night when the diner was empty and the desert wind howled outside. Day 23 since they came, she'd whisper into the microphone. I still see Martin's face, the way he looked at that sheriff, not with hate, but with certainty, like he'd already decided how the story would end, and nothing could change it. People keep asking me what it was like. I don't know how to explain it. Terrifying, beautiful, like watching a storm roll in and knowing you're about to see something most people never will. Old Man Henry says they're legends now, says the angels ride when justice demands it, then disappear before the law can catch up. I believe him. One evening, as Mara closed up, a single motorcycle pulled into the lot. Not 14, just one. Her heart jumped. The rider dismounted, pulled off his helmet. It was Chris, the youngest of the crew, the one with hard eyes that still held something soft beneath. "Miss Mara," he said, voice polite, almost shy. "Chris," she replied, smiling. "You're a long way from wherever you're headed." "Passing through. Martin wanted me to check on you. Make sure you're all right." "I'm fine," she said. "Better than fine, actually." He nodded, then pulled a small package from his saddlebag. "This is for you." She unwrapped it carefully. Inside was a Harley-Davidson pendant, simple, silver, well-worn. And a note. "For when you need the road again, call us. We ride for family. The Brotherhood." A phone number was written at the bottom. Mara looked up, tears in her eyes. "Tell Martin. Tell him thank you. For everything." Chris smiled, a real one, the kind that broke through the hard exterior. "He knows." He mounted his bike, kicked it to life. "Roads always open, Miss Mara. Don't forget that." Then he was gone, dust trail glowing red in the sunset. Mara stood in the parking lot, pendant in one hand, note in the other, and laughed through the tears. She'd been saved, not just Ellie, but her too. Saved from the belief that the world was just broken people doing broken things. Saved by men who proved that loyalty, brotherhood, and justice still existed, riding on two wheels, wearing leather, keeping promises the world had forgotten. 70 miles away, Martin sat by another fire, staring at Jesse's dog tag. "We kept the promise, brother," he said quietly. "Your sister's safe, and the road remembers." The fire crackled its agreement, and somewhere on Route 50, the wind carried the sound of engines, distant, eternal, always moving toward the next promise, the next fight, the next soul worth saving. Because that's what the angels did. They rode, they remembered, and they never, ever stopped. 6 months after the angels rode into Carson Ridge, the town had almost forgotten. Almost. But Mara hadn't. She wore the Harley pendant every day, tucked beneath her uniform, a reminder that some debts weren't measured in dollars and some heroes didn't wear badges. Ellie graduated high school early, earned a scholarship, and left for college in Colorado. Before she went, she visited Benny's one last time. She found Mara behind the counter, same as always, pouring coffee like the world hadn't tilted on its axis 6 months prior. "I wanted to say goodbye," Ellie said softly. Mara came around the counter and hugged her tight. "You're going to do amazing things." "Because of them," Ellie whispered. "Because of you." "No," Mara said, pulling back to look her in the eye. "Because of you. You survived. You're still here. That's all you." Ellie nodded, wiping tears. She reached into her bag and pulled out something small, Jesse's patch, the one Martin had given her. "I want you to have this," she said. "Ellie, no. Please. You're part of this now, part of the story, and Jesse would have liked you." Mara took the patch with trembling hands, tracing the worn stitching. I'll keep it safe. I know you will." They hugged once more, and then Ellie left off to build a life her brother had died protecting. That night, Mara sat in the empty diner, journal open, recording her final entry about the angels. 6 months ago, 14 men rode into town and changed everything. They didn't ask for permission, didn't wait for the law to do its job, they just acted. Because that's what family does. I've been thinking a lot about what Martin said, that loyalty means something, that promises matter, that the road remembers. I think he's right. I think there are still people in this world who believe in something bigger than themselves, who ride toward danger instead of away from it, who keep promises even when it costs them everything. The angels taught me that justice isn't always clean, it's not always legal, but it's always necessary. She paused, staring at the 2 patches on the counter, Roadkeeper Honor and Jesse's original patch. I don't know if I'll ever see them again, but I hope I do, because the world needs men like that. We all do. She closed the journal, locked up the diner, and stepped outside. The desert stretched endlessly under a sky full of stars, and then she heard it, that sound, that low, distant rumble. Her heart jumped. 14 motorcycles appeared on the horizon, headlights cutting through the darkness like promises made visible. They pulled into the lot in perfect formation, engines cutting simultaneously. Martin dismounted first, walking toward her with that same steady, unshakable presence. "Heard you might need a ride," he said, the ghost of a smile touching his lips. Mara laughed, tears streaming. "Where to?" "Wherever the road takes us." She looked at the diner, at the life she'd built from broken pieces, at the safety she'd clung to for so long. Then she looked at Martin, at the brothers standing behind him, at the open highway glowing silver under the moon. "Give me 5 minutes to grab my things. If you believe loyalty is stronger than law, and that some promises are worth riding through hell to keep, like and share this story. Subscribe now for more stories of brotherhood, justice, and the code of the road. Also, check out the 2 videos showing on the screen right now, specially crafted for you.